Вітаю вас в українському кризовому.
Today we start with the roundtable related to the presentation of the annual report on reforms.
В товаристві нещодавно ми з вами говорили про
We were talking about the results of the work of Ukrainian energy community recently, but today we will talk about internal reforms which are implemented by Ukraine. I would like, first of all, to invite Mr. Durstanvelert. You have seen where he is. So let's start with Olena Pavlenko, who's the president of DiXi Group, and she was preparing the report. Thank you. I would like to say that that wasn't just DiXi Group that was preparing it, but the Coalition Energy Reforms, which includes more than 20 experts in energy sector, and the project is implemented with the support of European Union and the Renaissance Foundation. This is the fifth report. We analyze to what extent Ukraine implements all the commitments from the beginning when Ukraine joined energy community. We believe it's very useful. It allows to see the progress and dynamics and assess where there are long-term problems or where there are problems which could be addressed quickly. Today I would like to present the report which covers the period from September 2014 till September 2015. I have very little time, so I will give a general overview. Here you see sector by sector how we assess the execution of the commitments taken by Ukraine. That assessment is not based on some methodology, it's rather our subjective assessment. But I would like to repeat it again, that we were able to analyze it from the beginning of Ukrainian membership in the community. So in the gas sector, our assessment is very high. Then there is secondary legislation which have been drafted already, but it's but this is in the process of being approved. Talking about electricity market, our assessment is also very high. Why part of this line is not colored is because the draft developed by the Ministry of Energy is practically ready. We would like to say that simultaneously the secondary legislation is being drafted, and that's positive, but ahead of us is the period which will take additional resources and time when the draft is to be passed by the parliament. Also talking about regulator, the draft law on independent regulator was prepared long time ago, but the problem again is the parliament, where there's no desire, no readiness to switch to a single version of the draft, to vote for it and introduce new law on regulator. We also put energy efficiency here to show how gas, electric power sector, how that is done compared, what are the results there compared to other sectors. People like to criticize gas and electric power sectors, but talking about executing directives, we see the biggest problem, which is energy efficiency and some other sectors. In energy efficiency, we have one more color, which is white. That's the new directive which Ukraine will have to implement. It's very complicated. And we will need a lot of time to introduce it. In other spheres, renewables, my colleagues will provide more comments on that. There are many prepared documents, but few of them were passed by the Verkhovna Rada. Statistics and oil, these are two big problematic issues in statistics. There are rules of procedure which have not been passed because there's no agreed-on position between the regulator and the Ministry of Statistics. And talking about oil, the work has started after a long period of quietness. The work has started, but we need to have secondary legislation and introduce amendments to the existing pieces of legislation. This is a very brief review of the report, but we request the journalists to monitor these sectors which do not really move forward, and these are environmental issues, renewables, and also there are many problems at the level of the parliament. Even when the drafts are developed, there are very few chances that within 3-4 months they will be passed by the parliament. And that is a big problem, because, and that hurts Ukraine, because it harms Ukraine, because the reforms are not moving forward. Now, talking about conclusions, we divided them into two types. First, what helped the success of changes. First was cooperation of champions. We see in the parliament, in the government, new faces, people who are ready to push reforms, and on how efficiently they cooperate between themselves. On that, the success of different legislations and regulations depend. Part of the requirements of the donors, whether this is part of requirements for providing assistance or not, on that depends how reforms are moving forward. Then participation of European experts, where European experts were involved into drafting legislation. The legislation was passed faster. The second part is obstacles, and the obstacles are delaying the process, and there are several reasons to that. And these are political issues which exist, and also the process of decision making by the authorities is also very slow. Second is duplicating initiatives. Very often there were cases when the draft comes to is submitted to the parliament, and immediately several clones are drafted, and it's very difficult to work in this situation, and that becomes an obstacle again. Third, very weak publicity and communication. It is especially true when we are talking about energy efficiency and renewables and tariffs. The publicity has grown compared to the previous years, but we believe that awareness campaigns are to be more active. And another big challenge is the implementation. We are talking about about passing the laws, but how they will be implemented. These are the discussions that we will have in the future. Recommendations that we would like to provide in the result of our monitoring. First, at the international level, we believe that despite the fact that Ukraine moves forward with difficulties and is implementing existing European legislation, we would insist that European partners involve Ukraine into their discussions about the future policies. We need to get involved into the discussion of future European regulations and directives. The second recommendation, which is preserving the principle of positive conditionality, to preserve certain conditions for reforms in Ukraine so that reforms are implemented faster. At the national level, our recommendation is to have more champions. We believe that we still need more champions. We need new faces in the parliament, in the government, and those who are ready to promote reforms need more knowledge. Second is more platforms for communication. The communication is very weak inside the government and between the government and the parliament. There should be more discussions to develop joint position better. This document, this monitoring was being printed at the time when there was this meeting of the group in the Ministry of Energy, but the Ministry of Energy, reacting to this challenge, organized the first multilateral group of stakeholders. All the ministries which are implementing requirements of energy community were present there, and the results are quite good. There are chances that we'll be able to establish better communication between all stakeholders. Another one is detailed monitoring and quality control of reforms. We will need to have a network of those who are ready to monitor changes, especially at the local level. And the next one is a wider context of reforms. Many problems are not in the energy sector, but in wider context. The system of decision making, the readiness to work, other political issues, judicial reform. Unfortunately, if we are not discussing these issues, we cannot say that we'll be able to implement all the requirements of energy directives. Thank you. Now, I will give the floor to the Mr. Mykhailo Bno-Ayriyan from the Ministry of Energy. Thank you, Olena. Thank you, DiXi Group, for this initiative. Thank you, Coalition of Reforms. In fact, When our new team came to the ministry, we started looking at what are the international commitments, where to move. And very few people understood what needs to be done when it comes to energy community. So it's clear that we lack communication and we lack coordination between the agencies, because the ministry coordinates the process politically, and we represent our country at the ministerial conferences in the energy community once a year, and I am part of the group of high-level group which gets together 4 or 5 times a year, and they prepare the agenda for the ministerial conference. What's happening at the ministerial conference? The decisions are made which are then become mandatory for Ukraine. So we started the process. We started going to Vienna, looking at all that, and this year demonstrated that, first of all, we lack communication as to monitoring and implementation of directives. The ministry is not responsible for many things, but other agencies are responsible according to the resolution of the government. Also, we understand that we are lacking efficient coordination when it comes to preparation of the meetings. We need to be moving one step ahead of the process, but not trying to catch up with the process. We looked at that very attentively, and now we have the initiative of creating, sort of restarting our work with the energy community. We signed an order and we set up a new multilateral group which includes the representatives of different ministries and agencies that are responsible for our commitments under the community, but we also invited the representatives of NGOs and civil sector into the group. Why?
First, to provide assistance to us, and we created this think tank to advise to us. Then we with this step, we demonstrated to the ministry that we have the civil society and experts involved in the process. In the past, we were rather isolated from information what was going on in different communities, in different groups, which with different stakeholders, and now we have a communication venue, communication platform where we can take this information. This was one key thing which we have done and which we maintain now. This second, we wish to have the meetings of the advisory group to have it on regular basis, for example, 2 weeks in advance before the group session in Vienna, and the second. We wish to keep hands on the designed changes or implementation of the European directives, and that's why the minister decided to bring together heads of our departments and all the stakeholders, governmental stakeholders, and decide how we can move forward more actively. Unfortunately, in the past, many officials believed that Ukraine's access to the energy community is just a formal thing, but it appeared that there are a lot of things which we have to do in line with our commitments, that our work in the community should force us to work more proactive and to be more proactive and move forward. On the other hand, the assistance which is provided to Ukraine by our macroeconomic donors, it also contains several requirements which demand that we do a lot of things. And with the Ministry of Energy, there are several issues which we have to do, and this is our responsibility. And this communication venue and the joint working group in the ministry will allow us to push this process forward. I believe that by the next session of this high-level group in Vienna, which will be on December 17, we will be well prepared to participate in its session, and we will have several things done. Now we continue to comment on the report itself, and I would like to invite Roman Nitsovych to add a couple of words about the report. Thank you for this opportunity. First, I would like to underline why this report is so important. In the association agreement, there is item 850, which is about Ukraine's commitments as to the energy community requirements, and it also describes the obstacles for implementation and the main targets to be reached by Ukraine, including gas sector. And I do not wish to spoil this bask of honey, but I wish to say that yes, we have the action plan how to implement reforms in the energy sector. We have passed the gas law, and actually the reform is launched, but there are several shortcomings. This new gas law requires for the package of bylaws implementing changes and amendments to the tax code, to the customs code, etc. And since the parliament haven't passed the most necessary draft laws from this package, there is no sense to introduce further changes to legislation to the parliament. Then a big issue is secondary legislation. They are not even registered in the parliament because they are now wandering around the ministries. Another important thing is to decide on the independence of the operators. For example, when in result of disbanding, the operators will be separated from their parent companies, which are now their parent companies, like Naftogaz, like local distribution networks. When the operators are separated as legal entities from the supply companies, how they will operate, and we now lack this legislation. And one more important thing, the situation with NAK Naftogaz. As of today, it continues to purchase all domestically produced gas and continues to sell it to the population at fixed price, and this fixed price doesn't change in line with market conditions due to the changed tariffs. It is possible for Naftogaz to get higher margin price, margin income on these payments, because they have a huge debt and they need to get some resources to settle these debts. On the other hand, this discriminates other market participants. And we need to think how to balance this thing. As to the security of supplies, we have reached some success. We have developed the action plan, how to act in emergency situations, but nevertheless, these rules, which are drafted and rather well designed, they are not passed at the level of legislation, and this again threatens the market. And creates the threat that in emergency situation, NAK Naftogaz again will be the only active player to mitigate all the risks. And one more aspect, opening of gas market requires involvement of new suppliers. For new suppliers, we have to create favorable conditions. And I heard some concerns from potential market actors that there is a requirement to create secured amounts of gas in the gas storages. That is, if you wish to sign a contract on supplies, you have to show that you have secured reserves of gas somewhere, and this discriminates some suppliers and creates problems for gas producers who produce gas. That is, to sum up what I've said, of course, there are much positive things which we have done, but we need to resolve that many problems which developed here.
Torsten Wellert from the Group of Support of Ukraine is responsible for energy issues.
Well, I'm Torsten Wellert. I'm the head of the energy group, of the support group of the European Commission for Ukraine. And we are working very closely with a number of partners in Ukraine already since more than a year. And I can confirm that we are in a very intensive process of promoting energy sector reform, and also To a large degree, I agree with the main conclusions of the report. Even though I haven't read the report, I have it in Ukrainian, and I must confess that this is still a challenge. What I want to say is a kind of general remark. When we talk about implementation of reforms, quite often the approach is, well, we have to change the laws. Of course, the laws need to be changed, but reform is not only the laws. So when you look at the slides and you say, well, what is the progress? This is just the progress to implement basic legislation. It's not the progress on having actual reform, because it takes much more to have a successful reform. And we see it in the EU. We have 28 member states. We have completely different experiences. In some countries it works much better, and in others it's much more difficult. And when you look at these slides, I think you should add at least 2 other slides of things that need to be done before things really become effective. And let me take an example. We have I think it was the first slide when we had the regulator. Yes. You see, we are, well, not yet at half of the needed measures to implement the laws. We have worked very intensively with international experts from different EU member states, energy community, European Commission, a wide range of stakeholders in Ukraine to prepare a law. Now this is being prepared for reading in the parliament. And now you come from the expert field into real life. And real life means the regulator has an impact on business decisions. And of course, they are very active and very powerful business actors who want to protect their interest. And what is very obvious is that there are different business interests. And what is now important, that the general public interest prevails. That it's not a compromise between different business interests, but that there is a vision of what does Ukraine want to achieve. And this is a bit a general remark for many of these areas, that in each of these sectors there's an understanding of what is the legislation that should be adopted, but there is not always a clear vision of what do we want to achieve with all this legislation. Where do we want to be? If you take, for instance, gas, which is, I agree, one of the most advanced sectors on legislation side. Now we're getting into secondary legislation, and then we will see how this all works. But still, if you ask different people, and I'm pretty sure here in the room will be the same phenomenon, there's not a common vision of where Ukraine in the gas sector should be in 5 to 10 years. What is the business model? Who should play which role? What is the role of people, of consumers? Because when you are in the European Union, you have different aspects, but one very important aspect is the right of consumers and the active role of consumers. Because if you want to have innovation, if you want to have new products, if you want to have competition, there must be people who want to buy it, who want to use it. And the same for electricity, etc., etc. So to come back on the example for the regulator, as Olena said, there is a link to the financial support from the European Union, and it is not, the support is just, it just says by a certain date there should be an agreement in Ukraine on how to do this. And of course it should follow some civilized rules. It should not be, African standards, it should be European standards. But it doesn't say what should be in all the details in this law. This is a purely Ukrainian decision to make. But it helps focusing the minds of the people that we have to sit together, we have to come to a compromise. You can invite international experts, but the decision has to be done here. And what we offer is expert advice, but also when the regulator is there, and just yesterday there was a roundtable where I participated, we have now, starting next year, we will support what we call a twinning, so a partnership, a strategic partnership between the Ukrainian energy regulator and the Slovakian energy regulator. Because there should be some synergies, there's a lot of experience in Slovakia on how to do this, transforming an old system into a new system. And I think this is something which we have to envisage in all these different sectors. What should be achieved? And also, how can this link up with experience in the same areas that has already been obtained in the European Union. And we have plenty of examples, and we are dedicated to make this match. But of course, it's important to have a practical willingness to work with the international partners. And there, this is not always very clear because the common vision is not always very clear. I want to come back on one thing which I know here in the panel is probably not, they're not the right people in the government who are in charge of it currently, in energy efficiency. Everybody says, yeah, it's important. And we have made progress because 1.5 years ago, essentially in the government, it was very, very low on the priority list. Now it has become more visible, and there has been done some strategic thinking about it. But I would be even a bit more skeptical on where we are, even on the legislative side. Some things have been passed, some things are in preparation, but to really become energy efficient, we are, if we are lucky, we are 15–20%. And this is just the legislation. But also why? Because there is no vision, no common understanding on who will play which role in energy efficiency and why do we do this? Yes, there is some legislation from the European Union, but in the end, it's the energy security, it's the national security of Ukraine, and it's the well-being of the people. And it's the well-being of the companies, because if you are, as a company, not energy efficient and you cannot count on dumped prices or on some tax privileges or on some subsidies, etc., you will not be competitive. And there will be transition periods, etc. But businesses, people have or should have an interest and should develop an interest in energy efficiency. And this is also part of what Olena mentioned in her slides, communication. People, I don't think that people have a clear understanding of how they, as a person, are involved, how are they concerned. Now when you talk about the tariff increases, now you have I just passed by, we have a tariff Maidan. And you know, the people are burning coal and they have their tents there and all this stuff. Is there any understanding, is there any effort to communicate the link between the tariff Maidan, energy efficiency, competitiveness, and the well-being of the people in 5 to 10 years? Is there any communication also by civil society, by professionals, by experts, to say, well, yes, we may have a tariff Maidan and we may get back to subsidized prices, but this will come at a price, and it will come at a price to all of us. And these are things where we have a lot of experience in the European Union, and this is something which I think once we are getting closer to this 100% on the legislation, we should actually enlarge the scope of cooperation. And one last remark, what is very important is that there is a certain degree of professionalism and of trust in the system, because you have a law, it needs to be implemented, and somebody needs to be in charge of implementing it. And when you take the energy regulator, the regulator needs to be a professional organization, and it doesn't have to be popular. No regulator everywhere in the world is popular, but it needs to be trusted, it needs to be serious, it needs to be fair. And this capacity is something which I feel needs to be built up. So there's a lot of mistrust, and there's lots of accusations, and there is little, let's say, willingness to really find common ground and say, okay, this is the minimum level of trust that we need, and then we can build it up over the years. And that's something which is very, very difficult to measure in any slides. It's very difficult also to support building up trust. That's really a process that has to be done here. And of course we are ready to provide support, but this is a fundamental issue which also has to do with the role of businesses, of government, of civil society. And as Mykhailo said, the more active participation there is, civil society. I think it's a trust building factor. That's very important.
Thank you, Torsten.
Sure.
Пана Дмитра.
I would like to invite to the microphone Mr. Mykhailo Shulga from Renaissance Foundation and ask him to add a couple of words about the role of civil society information of trust. Thank you, dear colleagues. I'm happy to be here today. That's true that we have been cooperating with the DiXi Group for a number of years, and we ensure communication between Ukrainian independent experts and civil society, and we provide information to our experts. Comparing this today's events and today's report to the previous period of our activities, I should say that we can observe some real achievements here. In the past, there was clear impression that Ukrainian commitments and joining to the energy community did not mean anything serious and real changes in policies. I think that this is for the first time when we have Ministry of Energy representative at this our presentation of the report, and now the ministry is more open to cooperation. This is a good example of best practices and cooperation between champions in this sector. Without close cooperation between the ministry and civil society, reforms won't be possible. And I would like to say once again that the big responsibility in reforming lays on the parliament. Ukraine's access to the energy community was ratified by the parliament, and now this is our commitment. These are our commitments which have to be implemented. We are very much lagging behind in a schedule of implementing that commitments. Of course, in excuse, we can say that in many energy community member countries, there are also problems with implementation of some commitments, but this not a good excuse for us, because there are many pieces of legislation which we have to speed up in passage. As of today, we have some good steps forward which we already made, and probably during next year we will have even better achievements. Thank you, Dmytro. And now I would like to invite Nataliya Andrusevych to comment on our commitments within the energy community, and specifically about commitments as to environmental protection and what we have to change in our policies in the environmental area. Thank you, Taras. I would like to point out to the environmental component of Ukrainian commitments to the energy community, and speaking about energy sector, we quite often mention the environment because this is part of the general European approach when environmental issues are incorporated into different sectoral policies, including the energy sector. And in line with these commitments of Ukraine, we have to implement environmental directives. This is rather well-designed list of commitments and directives about content of sulfur in liquid fuels, then emissions from big combustion installations, then the protection of migrating birds, and one more directive about the control of emissions. And when we look at the review of energy community, which is published annually in September, October, this year we received many positive assessments from them in general, but not in the environmental area. In result of our evaluation and analysis, we came to conclusion that neither of Ukrainian commitments has been fulfilled as of today. Just an example. As to content of sulfur, we had to implement our commitments by 2012, the influence of general emissions to the environment by 2013, and migration of birds by 2013. So we did not meet all the deadlines. As of today, we have developed implementation plans for all the directives. They were approved by this new government, and they provide for necessary institutional and technical operational changes which have to be introduced to legislation. Also, the national plan on reduction of emissions from big combustion installations has been developed and discussed with broad public, and it is passed, and now we expect for establishment of the working group on implementation of this plan. We believe that Ministry of Environment will become very active participant of this group. Another not very optimistic features, the energy community may open several cases as to those countries which do not comply with the commitments. And as far as I know, one of the cases opened against Ukraine about sulfur and about general environmental impact assessment. Unfortunately, during the last year, we haven't seen any changes as to sulfur emissions. By the way, drafting of several pieces of legislation doesn't mean the implementation of directives. Yesterday in the Parliament, you observed the process, how the one of the environmental laws remained beyond their attention.
As to large combustion units, there's a lot of work related to that ahead. On the 16th of October, the Council of the Ministers of Energy Community passed a decision, and there are many issues which are related to Ukraine, so the amendments are to be introduced into the implementation plan, and we need to look at other documents which are to be amended because of that decision. And as to birds, unfortunately, in the implementation plan of this directive, there are no specific things which should be related to energy community, so we hope that there will be some work done in this direction. There should be special preserve zones for birds created. And we hope that this issue will be addressed. So summing it up, as to environment, the expectations of expert community and civil society, the expectations were probably too high when it relates to environmental issues, because we believe that the new government was pro-European and new parliament was pro-European, and we expected to see some reforms in that sphere, but we have what we have, and we are ready to support this work as experts and cooperate with the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Energy. Mr. Savitsky. This is quite irritating. The Taras misspelled the name. So I just wanted to emphasize one thing, and that is about the role of that component, the protection of environment in energy community and in energy policy in Europe. In Europe, that is the component which is integrated. All energy policy is developed taking into account long-term effects and environmental impact. And the climate policy and the energy policy are integrated, and via the development of such sectors as renewables and energy efficiency and the environmental impact assessment, which also includes the assessment of the impact of large structural projects at environment. So that is the single system which allows to transform the energy sector so that it consumes less low oxygen, and that is the process which has been started in Europe. And if Ukraine doesn't want to be an economic outsider in the 21st century, then we have to join this transformation in Europe, and we need to become part of that new energy structure which will provide many opportunities for economic growth. We don't have this understanding in Ukraine of the perspectives in these sectors, energy efficiency and renewable energy.
То ми побудуємо нову економіку.
If we introduce that, we will create new economy. As to environment, on the 20, I would be more pessimistic than the slide shows. There are some drafts, but they are clones. There are many contradictions in there. Basically, the system of impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, doesn't work. The public doesn't have any impact on decision making. The society has the voice and it should influence things that are important for the future of the region or the country. There's a lot of work to be done. In fact, we have a lot of work ahead. I mean legislative drafting and enforcement work. The mechanisms of control and monitoring. One more thing I would like to add. The national plan on reduction of
В плані впливу
emissions is very important document, which is important for the sector of thermal energy, which plays an important role in energy system. But if we select the way of innovative development, then the role of this sector is to be changed. Now we received some special terms from energy community, and that relates to reforming this sector, harmonizing it with the requirements of directive of European Union. We have unique conditions. The term of implementation is now till 2033, and we can operate the power plants which cannot be modernized, and not for 20,000 hours, but 40,000 hours during the whole period of implementation of the national plan of reduction of emissions. So we do see a lot of assistance from European community and European Union. So, but well, what we need to do is absolutely achievable. We need just to understand that this sector is to be restructured. We cannot live another 20 years at the expense of power plants which are 40, 50 years old. Such power plants are decommissioned in Europe. They give us some reserve for the economy for 10, 15 years. But we need to speed up changes and introduce new innovation infrastructure. I would like to emphasize that environmental issues are paid a lot of attention in the energy community. I would like to thank all the speakers. We have 5-7 minutes for comments and questions, and plus you will have time to ask additional questions informally later. So if you have any questions, you're welcome.
Alexander Yusukov, Interfax. My question to Mykhailo. Could you comment when the Cabinet of Ministers is going to review the law on the electricity? That's a standard question which I hear quite often during the last time. The draft law is finalized fully. That is, from the Ministry of Justice, we have received their opinion, and we incorporated necessary changes. We had been waiting for the opinion of the World Bank, Energy Community, and the European Union. This was a joint opinion which they had to produce. We received this opinion a couple of days ago. That is, everything is ready to submit this draft law to the Cabinet of Ministers session, and then after the committee, parliamentary committee, has to review this law. We are interested in passage of this law as soon as possible. In parallel with this process, we are carrying out very active work on the secondary legislation even before this law is passed. That is, we learned the lesson from the passage of the gas market law, and there is now a big team of experts from the energy community. The roadmap for development of the secondary legislation is designed, and a big team of experts is involved there. They are drafting this necessary secondary legislation. So will we be able to see this draft law on electricity market? I'm not sure whether the Cabinet of Ministers has to publish it before its discussion, but what I'm sure about, that the draft law will appear on the website of the Parliament when it is registered in the Parliament for passage. And this draft law, we reflected position of the dozen of public hearings. I would ask a question about the energy saving and energy efficiency, and add a couple of remarks here. Our European partners, I'm very grateful to them. They suggested several amendments to legislation, and the draft law on energy efficiency. It is not broadly debated, but nevertheless, and the draft law should be based on the directive on energy efficiency. How do I see the problem? When experts suggest something, they suggest to put all necessary things together in one law. But this one law on different matters has no chances to pass the Parliament. And I analyzed the directive on energy efficiency, directive number 27, and it was possible to implement it at the organizational level, but as to the indicators as of 2012, it was impossible to implement, because in Europe they have growth and development, at least minimal, but in Ukraine we have the decline in manufacturing, the war in the east, etc. I think that now it's a good idea to allocate special funds from the budget for strengthening energy efficiency. But alongside with this, the system of energy audit in Ukraine was eliminated. Of course, that system was imperfect, sure, but it was ruined totally. All the regulatory functions carried out by that energy audit were eliminated, but nothing was created instead. Okay, I'm advised to discuss this directly. That is my message. The energy efficiency should be, the problem of energy efficiency should be tackled somehow. I tried to introduce economic stimulation of energy efficiency via economic leverage. After this meeting, I am going to have a meeting with one of the members of parliament. I have a draft law on this way. It is needed to nobody, but this is important. The laws which you are discussing, this should be the laws of direct action without any possibilities for corruption. And now to the Ministry of Energy. When you write down your plans, I suggest to have space for the audit, the energy audit. I wrote a lot of letters and I invited to cooperation. I don't think that everything is so grave with energy efficiency. Any further questions? If there are no further questions, then we will have short comment from the ministry and then my colleagues will add. I am not next. I'm not responsible for energy efficiency. It's not our sphere. We have very close cooperation on Directive 27, and the minister decided to establish one special unit in the ministry which will coordinate this work on behalf of our ministry. And we will coordinate our work with the Ministry of the Regional Building, which is responsible for the energy efficiency, and we will try to analyze the situation and to define the underlying problems. And as to general approach to Ukrainian commitments to the energy community, this was the reason why we have established our intergovernmental working group, which will look in advance at these commitments and advise what should be done next. That is, we realize that we have taken a lot of commitments, but we have no idea how to implement them. That during this year we realized that there are a lot of commitments about which we do not, we have no idea how to implement them. Dmytro mentioned that ministry was never present at these presentations of the reports. But now we recognize that NGOs and civil society and expert community, they can provide real assistance to us. We have realized that we are unable to implement many our commitments by ourselves because we lack human resources, we lack vision, we lack experts. And yes, for example, yesterday we met with investors and they asked us several very tough questions, and we realized that we have to cooperate to find the answers to these questions.
I said already that I think we are not, I don't want to be negative. I mean, I think there is a movement, there is a process of being more serious, being more organized, more structured on energy efficiency. But what we are talking now about is the basics. I mean, you cannot implement a complex law if some basics are missing. For instance, metering, billing according to consumption. There's no legal basis for this. It is not being done. And there's a lot of resistance to it. And we have experts working on this to make sure that energy consumption will be metered systematically and that it will be built according to consumption. Without this, you may have silové programy, you may have komplexní zákony, you may have whatever you want to have. And it will not work. And that comes back to the point that people should have a vision. There should be a clear vision of what does energy efficiency mean for industry. It means competitiveness. It means new technology. It means nauka. It means whatever. For the consumer, for instance, we are now discussing the next winter. We are already starting to get there. And everybody's talking about gas supplies and coal reserves, etc., etc. One thing is that there's a problem that people may not be able to pay for their bills. Okay, there's a subsidy system, there's some money reserved for it. But how is it organized? It is organized in a way that it does not stimulate energy efficiency. And the society, the Ukrainian state, is investing more than $1 billion into this. $1 billion without any consideration for energy efficiency. And I think this is a missed opportunity. So we are really working on different fronts, and I don't think that we should, do the second step before the first one. If you have no billing, if you have no metering, you can have any perfect law, it will not work. And I think I've seen a lot of draft laws which reflect the Directive 1, 2, 3 of the European Union. But I think what we need is a vision, and we need a step-by-step plan. And for this, we need what you said, a kind of coordinating platform, a working group, whatever, including experts from EU member states who have had the same problem and who have solved the problem. I have colleagues coming from Poland, from Lithuania, etc. And they all still remember, in the 90s they had the burjika in their apartment and all these things. This is gone, this is the past. And we have all this expertise. What we don't have yet, or we're getting there, but we don't have it yet, is a platform where you have civil society, where you have industry, where you have businesses. It is a problem, it's a structural problem that there is no consolidated voice of businesses, whether you like it or not. You talk to one business, they have one vision. You have another business, they have their particular interest. And this is, I'm coming back to my question of trust. You need to have some professional basis and you need to have some trust. And energy efficiency is something, it starts with the education of your kids. It starts, with having a bill which you can understand, so that it's something for what really people at large should take care of. And the approach that so far has been done is a rather technical approach, and I don't think this will really bring us very far. But of course I agree that we have to work on the directives, and we have now also the chance. There is the Industrial Emissions Directive. The implementation is until 2033. You have the chance to take a strategic look, to have a consensus. You don't have to do it yesterday, but you have to start today. And you have to take civil society, consumers, regulators, industry, businesses, you have to take them on board. And of course, what we can offer, we can participate. We can bring people, from all the 28 member states. We can work with the EBRD and what have you. But this platform is very important. And I hope that there will be this kind of broad coalition of the willing, as they say, to move on this step by step. And for instance, you're absolutely right. In the European Union, we have in the European Commission, we have one commissioner for energy and climate, because it's linked. When you look at our strategy, we have a 2020 energy and climate strategy. We have a 2030 energy and climate package. And this is something which has not happened in the past, and I hope we get there. Also, when you look at industrial emissions, CO2 emissions, we had discussions about Ukraine's proposals for the COP21 conference in Paris. And what is obvious, there's a clear contradiction. You take one plan, it looks like this. You take another plan, it looks completely different. And this is, of course, something which shows that there's a lot of things to do in Ukraine. And energy efficiency is a prime example of where people can feel that it makes a difference because they pay less, they have more modern equipment, they have increased standards in their houses, the companies get more competitive, etc. So it's complex, but I think we should not start with saying, I have this law and this law and this law. Of course we need to do it, but to have this platform.
Дякую за цей коментар. Колеги, я думаю,
Colleagues, I believe that we have expressed everything we wanted. The more detailed information is in the report. There are a few copies of it here. Thank you for this discussion. The issue of energy and energy community is much more comprehensive than just about oil and gas, and our discussion has confirmed that. Thank you, and I invite you to our informal zone for communication.